Yeah, no problem.
All right, we are now recording our
Awesome.
exciting adventure into the CI product.
Sure, yeah. So I do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to share yours? Like, how do you want to?
Why don't you share yours, and I can watch that, and then I can take notes in the background on my Notion.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. So I think the general purpose was you wanted to just kind of walk through the part of the product that is Verify CI in GitLab. Is that right? Or like, are there specific questions you have maybe, or?
No, mostly just a walkthrough from a product perspective. So this is like the beginning of my third week being on the Verify team. As I start, working on bugs and looking into stuff, I realized that for instance, the pipeline exists in like 5 different places, the pipeline widget, and I don't necessarily know off the top of my head which ones those are. And since you do the product for us, you seemed like the right person to give me the overview of how it looks from a product perspective.
Sure, and I'll try, but as I like to point out, I've got that science dog that doesn't know what he's doing as my avatar for my demo projects here. But yeah, so yeah, we'll just kind of walk through. I'll spend 10 minutes maybe kind of talking at you about how I see the CI part of things, and then from there, hopefully we'll like have a lot of questions. And I really appreciate you taking notes because I think you're going to have a lot of insight. I always say that people that are new like have such a unique opportunity to contribute in a way that those of us that are been here longer can't. Especially for me, because like I have been using GitLab since before I even was at GitLab, so like I am blind to a lot of things that I need help with. And I'm really excited to have you on the team to help me not be so blind to those things and see things that are obvious UX and UI sticking points. So anyway, so yeah, I'm just going to kind of dive in. This is gitlab.com/Brendan demo, which is public. /Brendan-demo, which is public. It's just kind of where I play with some different CI things. And so this is a little React dashboard app that I deploy to GitLab pages with CI. So if I look, this is behind the curtains, not CI stuff, but just to bring up the page, right? It's just this thing called Core UI that gives you a one of 1,000 admin dashboard templates that are in the world in React, right? But it's decent because it's a decent sized application. I don't know that I'd call it a real world application, but it's decent size at least to play with. So the way that I get at CI typically is through GitLab CI YAML, right? That's the thing that's going to define the stages and jobs that are going to be included in my pipeline eventually. Now, there's another thing that GitLab has that I'm not going to necessarily talk about unless you want to later, called Auto Devops, where I don't have to define a GitLab CI YAML. Technically, that is part of the configure stage at GitLab, not the verify stage, but of course it uses the verify stage as much of the operation side of the house does. That's why on our vision page for verify, I call verify the gateway to operations, right? Because it's how release orchestrates the things that the GitLab release stage does. It's how configure orchestrates a lot of what they do, especially Auto Devops. It's how secure orchestrates what they do, and how a lot of secure's outputs are exposed to the user. And so verify has this interesting kind of inflection point between you're writing the code and then you're deploying and operating the code. In fact, some folks would argue that verify should be on the dev side of the house versus the ops side of the house. We have it as the first op stage, but yeah, anyway. Here, I have not used that though. I've manually orchestrated my jobs and stages with the GitLab CI YAML. So here we can see like the basic structure of the YAML is jobs that are here, and there's some stuff up above that I'll talk to. And each of those jobs is going to have at a minimum a stage and a script that it runs. So the stages are run in serial, right? Like first here we see the stages defined as prepare, build, test, deploy. So those stages are going to run serially like that. But then if there are multiple jobs within a given stage, those run in parallel, right? So here we can see the prepare stage is going to run this one job called npm. It's going to run npm install. The build site job is going to run during the build stage and run npm build. And then I've got some much more complicated jobs here below that are going to do stuff with code quality and performance. We'll come back to that after we look at the pipeline maybe. And then I've got a special job named pages, which is a protected job name in GitLab that deploys it into GitLab pages, which for GitLab.com is hosted on GitLab.io, and that's how I get this live app running. Of course, it's just it's basically a static site hosting GitLab pages, and so this renders down in the end to just HTML and JavaScript that can be hosted here. Okay, so that's the overview of that. We can come back to it and talk about it more, but I don't want to spend too much time on any one thing. So every time I commit my code, that pipeline is going to run, right? And there's a lot of options I can do around what runs on branches versus on master. In fact, we can see that here already. Here we're running something on the branch chain something, versus here we're running a commit on master. And you can see the stages are different, right? Because I've got these stages below. Let's see what that is. So prepare, build, test, but then I don't have deploy, right? So this deployment only happens on master. And we could have seen that there. I didn't point it out to you in the YAML. But that's why these look a little bit different, right? I can see the status of all of these. You can see there's a couple different statuses. There's failed, which is obvious. Pass, which is pretty obvious. This pass, which is less obvious maybe, which means it passed but with warnings, right? And so this SAS job is allowed to fail and still pass the pipeline, but it had some warnings involved. So then if I want to look at an individual pipeline, let's see what warnings happened on this pipeline, right? I can either click into a job from here and go right into the output of that job, right? So if I click on the SAS job, this is now the actual trace from when it ran that job. And so we'll see the steps here, right? Like export, Docker run this container, right? Those are the things that were specified in my YAML, and then the output of the scripts, right? And all the stuff that happened. And then at the very bottom, hopefully we'll see what happened. I can't tell what happened because I don't understand it, but something bad happened. Maybe I've got a weirdly malformatted React element of some sort. I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like fragment isn't defined or something. That weird.
Yeah. I also don't know React, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, but the other way I could get back to this, was from the pipeline page. I could click this, and I'm going to get more details around the pipeline as a whole. So here we see the same thing that I was hovering over to expand, but in one kind of view, right? Like everything that happened, again, stages, prepare, build, test, jobs that run concurrently with the stages, right? I can click back in here. I get to the same place we just were on that SAS job. Or I can also go to the failed jobs tab here, which will show me just the bottom trace from any job that failed. So here we can see the same thing. I can also see every job that ran in a kind of a different view, right? This is more of like a top-down view versus a left-to-right view. I can see what commit this was based on and what the hash for that was. I can see how long it took to run, when it ran. I can retry a failed job, which this will fail again because I'm pretty sure because I've got some syntax error in there. But that's kind of the overview of the pipeline. So then I can also see every job that's running. And so this is just basically an expanded view of the pipeline list we were looking at before. I can also schedule. So there's a number of things that can trigger jobs, right? Like I said, a commit is going to trigger a job, obviously, on the branch that the commit's done. You can also have jobs triggered on tag. You can have jobs triggered from an upstream pipeline. So if there's some upstream dependency here that then triggered this pipeline to run, I could. And I can also have a schedule. So like maybe I want to run every week some job.
What kind of upstream would trigger a pipeline? Like, I'm not quite sure I understand how that works.
Sure. So right now we actually only have the upstream triggering a downstream, which is a little less intuitive. We're actually adding right now being able to watch an upstream pipeline and trigger, which is maybe more realistic. But like, let's say you had an iOS and an Android app that you were deploying that needed to redeploy anytime you updated your server-side API, right? That server-side, those might be 3 different projects in GitLab, right? One that has like the server-side API code, one that has the iOS, Objective-C code, and then one that has the Android code for the Android app. So you might say, anytime I change project A server-side code, trigger a rebuild and deploy of iOS and a rebuild and deploy of Android, or something like, right? Like you can imagine there's lots of those kinds of, that's what we mean when we say trigger. We're actually looking at changing those words to upstream and downstream, but like, again, things that build maybe a larger system than would be contained typically in one project, right? Like microservices would be a great buzzword to use here, but like anything that really consists of more than just the project itself, right? So everything that we've looked at so far has been very project centric on this one React project within GitLab. But obviously, when building applications for the real world, it's not only just one little project that you get to deploy as HTML and JavaScript. It might be multiple projects that come together into a overall application or overall system, depending on how you name your world.
And then you trigger those using the GitLab config YAML. Is that right?
Correct.
How you would
Correct.
do that?
Yep. So there's a really great doc that I love, and the fact that I love it is not a positive thing. I've actually talked with our team about, and we're doing a lot about on our docs team. But there's this configuration reference. It's great reference documentation, right? And so that's what I always say. I say, Brendan O'Leary, GitLab CI user of 3 years, loves this document because I come here and control F whatever I want. But it might not be the best for anybody else. Maybe I could find some examples in it, though, is why I pulled it up. Yeah, if I look at the trigger syntax, I might say that on after deploy, go trigger some other projects on its stable branch, right? And so that may be where I again trigger a downstream pipeline, and then that actually shows up in the UI in a great way. And I think I have one somewhere where you can see an upstream pipeline triggering a downstream pipeline, maybe triggering another downstream pipeline. And so I think I do actually have that in Brendan demo for the folks following along at home in the buzzword compliant microservices group. I have a parent and be downstream where the pipeline, I think for a parent, yes. So we can see we build and then I trigger, and then that triggers this downstream pipeline on the other project, which I can't go to.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting that you would really want to be able to click like right into the pipeline of the downstream one theoretically, right from here.
Yeah, that would be a great one for us to write down together. Why can't I do that? I thought you could. I don't know. That's either broken or shouldn't be like that. So it is broken one way or another. Yeah, so then here we can see the build happening on the child where a parent, yeah, see, a parent is supposed to go back. There's something funky. So he's trying to do something for me. We'll figure that one out. I think some of that expansion might actually be coming in 11.9, and so we could be in the middle of a release candidate issue here, but I'm not sure. But that's definitely worth looking into. Yeah, so that's the idea of upstream and downstream kind of relationships, and that's something that has traditionally been kind of hard to manage in GitLab, and we're trying to make more lovable. And we're seeing some of that there. As far as other things that you can do with it, let's talk about like other use cases. So another thing we saw was caching. Let's just go back to my React app. So I had that prepare job, and all that prepare job was doing was npm install. But then it was doing something special with that, where we can see that I've defined a global cache here, and I can define this as a job level or, and I can zoom in a little for you. I don't know how good it looks actually. But here you can see I'm caching node modules, right? And so what that means is if node modules exists, at the end of my job, upload it to the cache, and then pull it down before I start my next thing, right? And so I'm not a developer, but if I was a developer, I'd be a node developer. So a lot of my examples are going to be in node. Sorry.
No, I'm a JavaScript person. That's fine.
yeah. So like here, my prepare stage is just doing the npm install, but then caching node modules for everybody else, right? So I don't have to npm install every time. And you can see in my build site job, it's just doing npm build, which those of us that are node developers and JavaScript people know would fail if you didn't have your modules, but we're caching them, so it's okay. And then there's another concept of artifacts. So just to kind of differentiate those two, here we have the code quality job that's kind of scanning for code quality. It's using a GitLab Docker image to do that. And you can have an artifact be kind of like any generic thing you want. And so sometimes folks use, and the difference between artifact and cache in this case being that artifacts are kind of meant to outlive the pipeline, right? Like maybe if I needed to pass something to the downstream pipeline, it could be an artifact, whereas the cache is only kind of like best case, and it's for this pipeline only. And so the artifact can be just kind of any path, like, oh, I want to wrap up this, set of jars into a tar GZ that is on this, right? And then there it is. Or it can be the special report type. So we have a report type of artifact that in this case is a very specific JSON format that then GitLab interprets and puts in the merge request to surface like the different report output that we have. And so that can include things like code quality. So we can see there's no changes to code quality in this. Performance, right? Performance is another category of ours in Verify. So we can see that the speed index went down by some measure, and then unit tests, right? So here we can see unit tests all passed, all one of them, right? And so this report artifact is how GitLab interprets that data, right? So we can see the code quality report artifact, the performance artifact. Let's see the test. Oh, it probably is in this merge request. In this merge request, I'm adding unit tests, right? So here we can see I'm just running unit tests that then output a like JUnit XML for GitLab to interpret. Other ideas. So a couple other concepts I'll touch on. So we saw this image at the top. Again, this is a global image declaration. So the GitLab runner actually has a number of different executors that it can run as, right? The most common is our Docker executor, and that's what like the shared runners on GitLab.com are. And so the beauty of the Docker executor and the little bit of luck about when we built the product, when Docker was becoming a thing, and B, I got to give Camille some credit on having a little bit of vision here in what he built. Although he gets shy when I give him this credit, like it's kind of built with this Docker first mentality. And so the beauty is the developer can just call a base Docker image from Docker Hub or wherever to do the build inside of, right? And this just enables you to go a lot faster than other tools where you might have to like, oh, I want to use node 10 now instead of node 8. I've got to go open a ticket for my DevOps team to add a node 10 runner or process to our build process. And so that's what we're doing here. We're just saying generally use the node latest image when you're building, but then I can also override that. So you can see code quality is just using Docker stable to do that. And then also you can call out services. So I don't know how well you know Docker, but services here just means like another Docker image to run alongside. And so we run Docker and Docker alongside so that we can run Docker and Docker. It's very meta.
Very recursive. Yeah,
Yeah, very recursive and meta.
I don't know a ton about the details about Docker. I know generally.
Yeah.
What?
So, I mean, yeah, you don't need to know a whole lot, I think, to get started with Verify. Again, huge power of Verify that, like, I know enough to be dangerous with Docker, and so I can be dangerous in Verify. But then the executor can be other kinds of executors too, right? Like you can have just a shell executor that's just running on some sort of compute platform that just literally the scripts you run are just going to shell out to that thing. You can have an executor inside of Kubernetes. You can have an executor called Docker plus machine, which is where you actually spin up an additional VM to then run inside of each time you do a job, which actually GitLab.com is doing too, but it's transparent to the user. But the beauty of that is your runner can be anywhere. So like an example I give of that is a semi-silly project of mine. I have a rarely posted to blog called CI/CD All the Things, where I try to use GitLab CI/CD for. Oh, look how rarely it's posted. My certificate's expired. That's how rarely I post to it. So like I got a thing called a Pi hole at home, which is a Raspberry Pi that you use as like a DNS black hole for like tracking software, like ad tracking stuff, where basically to take your whole house and make a black hole of like, I don't want to be tracked by all these stuff that's out there. You can say, okay, put a DNS in the middle of all your devices. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I, of course, when I was doing it, said, let's put it on GitLab. And so the beauty of that is it's a Raspberry Pi sitting in my house, but I wanted to be able to deploy to it, right? And so like a more typical or a less flexible platform might say, oh, well, now I've got to poke a hole in my router and like have GitLab.com like connect in through to my home somehow. But I didn't need to do that because I just installed GitLab Runner on my Raspberry Pi inside my network, and it's pinging GitLab.com to look for jobs, right, rather than the other way around. So it's a lot safer. So if I go to my CI/CD settings here, we'll see my little Raspberry Pi runner. So if I go to runners, the runners available to me are all of GitLab.com's shared runners, but also this little friend called the Pi hole, which is the Raspberry Pi in my house that I tagged with a thing called prod, which is just you can tag it with anything, but I called it prod, which means that all of the jobs that are tagged with prod, which are the only things that I'm actually running here, will only run on that runner, right? And so this basically says, connect to that runner because it's tagged prod, and run this shell script, right? Boom, done. And so when a job executes there, it actually does not execute on GitLab's cloud. It executes on my Raspberry Pi at home. And so you can see it running on Pi hole, right? And so that's all just running. It clones the whole thing to the Raspberry and runs the script. Again, a little bit more maybe of an advanced use case, but really valuable for people that want to like have like a bespoke runner, a runner that, a lot of our users will have maybe a shared pool of runners like we have on GitLab.com on their self-hosted instance, but then they may have specific runners to deploy right to production, and now that runner is more locked down. So anyway, that is runners in 5 seconds.
Well, so I'm a little still curious about runners. I'm not totally certain I understand exactly what a runner is. Mm-hmm. I know. That's it. I'm not 100% sure like what it is. I know that one can install it locally on one's own machine. Mm-hmm. I'm not. So is that just like what's running the like it's allotting the threads and like the computing memory to run the processes?
Exactly. Yeah. So GitLab Runner is a separate application, right? That's just written in Go. I'm going to get to some training slides here. Sorry, because I know there's a couple slides that will help me talk maybe better about it. Yep. So it's just a little process, right, that runs somewhere, and it's written in Go, so it can run on almost anything, right? You can install it on your computer, you can install it anywhere. And so it is basically the process that's sitting and waiting for jobs that match it from GitLab, and then it takes and grabs those jobs and executes them, right? So yeah, it's kind of like just a little service, if you will, that runs on your computer or any computer you want. And then again, it can get more complicated when you say, okay, I want this runner to actually auto scale more runners for it, right? So that's what we do on GitLab.com. Like we've got a couple of runner like hosts that then spawn lots of other runner hosts, right? Like I go to dashboards, GitLab.com, which is also public, and I go to CI. Auto scale machine metrics, I think is the one I want. We can see that like all day long, here's how many jobs have been run in the last 24 hours on GitLab.com. Somewhere, I mean, this is just total file system and memory and everything. Where's the number of instances? I would think that would be here. Right, but basically, as these jobs are coming in, we scale up machines to run them, and then we destroy them when we're done. And so that's obviously a much more complicated use case than just installing it on one machine. But it's what we and many of our large enterprise customers do in order to like balance. What it lets you do is balance. How long does it take for a job to get started with how much am I paying for compute, right? Like obviously you could just have a bunch of bulky servers that are really powerful sitting around waiting for jobs all day. And that works too. But you know, in a cloud native-ish world, you want to just have it scale up and down as needed.
That makes sense. And so one thing, if like customers are saying, oh, it's taking forever to run our jobs, like one solution is add more machines.
Exactly, add more compute, exactly. And say, okay, let it run concurrently. Okay, here's more. Yep, runs the scripts inside. We saw that architecture. Yeah, again, you can have shared and specific, right? So like, again, on GitLab.com, everybody just gets the pool of shared runners, right? And so we limit like the number of minutes depending on your tier that you get to run against our compute. And actually coming soon, you can buy more minutes. But what a lot of people do is they bring their own specific runners, right? And then they've brought their own compute, and they kind of like own then their ability to scale how fast and slow and where things run. But yeah, you literally just run, you know, this binary that you get from GitLab, and then you register it against GitLab, and it starts waiting for jobs. Hopefully that helped. Sorry.
Yes, that helps. No, that helps a ton.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like a complicated, it's not complicated, but it's like, I don't know, it's a lot of bespoke terminology maybe, right? Like to like take a hold of when you're first coming on board, I bet. And again, I've always got to remind myself, and like I'm always working to remind myself that like you've been doing this a really long time, and like that doesn't help the new people, or like someone that wants to figure out GitLab CI, or like the brand new user that signs up on GitLab.com today, like, right? That's who I
Yeah,
want.
it's definitely not. I've spoken a little bit to some of the tech writing people too. I know that you guys are working on sort of expanding the documentation, because yeah, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to like dive right into. Well, it's interesting, I think, because there's two levels of it in the product, right? There's like the configuration part and like building it, which is all very interesting. And then there's the like user part where, you know, if you're someone who's writing code all day and pushing it up, the more dev side of the DevOps part of it is a totally different thing, where a lot of your encounter is really going to be through that pipeline widget or the bigger pipelines.
Exactly. Yeah, and then there's a lot to be done about that, I think. Just like to kind of get your front end thoughts flowing, right? Like we've looked at nice, simple Brendan demo projects, right? But if we go look at a little bit more of a real world use case, like building GitLab CE, it gets way more complicated way more quickly, right? So like the GitLab CI YAML for GitLab itself is 1170 lines, right? Which, you know, as we all know as programmers, is not necessarily an indication of good, because that might mean that some stuff is not written really well, right? Or not against the people that wrote this YAML, but like probably we're not giving primitives that let you dry up code better, right? And then the pipeline is obviously also very complicated and then basically always running, right? As you'll come to find as you start committing more and more code. Right? I mean, there's only, oh no, there's a bunch. Like, yeah, so the entire first page is basically running pipelines, right?
What's that pipeline icon, the like slanty one? So if you look at
this canceled. Yep, that's.
Oh, I see.
Yep, it's a good question. That was canceled. So someone canceled it, which can happen manually. Like I'm not going to do this. In fact, I probably don't have permissions to. Yeah, but if I had permissions, I could cancel some job in here.
Oh wow, this one's huge.
Yeah, this is the test. So this is RSpec, right?
Yeah.
And so we run like 50 parallelized RSpecs on GitLab. There's some manual triggers, right? So another thing we didn't talk about yet is like I can have some that manually trigger, right? So like this one, in this case, like to deploy a full QA review app, I actually have to like request it, right? And say play. But yeah, these actually are supposed to collapse into one thing. I don't know why.
Where it's just the numbered 1 out of 50.
Yes. And then, yeah, and then skipped, you can see like it'll skip things sometimes, or you can actually tell it to skip. But yeah, this is canceled. You see this whole pipeline was canceled. Oh, I was gonna say another commit to that branch can cancel it too, right? So like here we can see like this person, Alcantara, has committed a couple times to this branch. And so once there's another commit, we try to be smart about being efficient and stop the pipeline before because something changed, like run the pipeline fresh, right? Is the theory behind that. Yeah, we can see this is a commit to master on GitLab, and it's going to be not insane. Yeah, it's 139 jobs run on every master commit for GitLab itself.
Mostly test. Unsurprising.
Mostly, yes, heavy test, right? Oh yeah, so here they're rolled up together, right? So like RSpec PG is actually using our parallel keyword, where you can tell it to run up to 50 parallel jobs, and then it creates those and gives you like a index, right? Like a variable that's the index of it, and so then you can smartly split up your jobs into parallel. But we also want to do that automatically for people, because like why, if we knew it was a Rails app, like why couldn't we just do that, right? So like yeah, that's a lot of the stuff that I want to like tackle is like I think the thing I always say to folks is like, I think where GitLab CI, CD, verify, whatever you want to call it, is, you should call it verify. If Sid or Mark were watching me say whatever you want to call it, they'd be mad.
I actually updated our team page as my handbook update for onboarding as I went, and I changed all the CI/CD to release.
Nice, good job. That's the GitLab way. Like there should be one term for it. Like that's why I said they'd be mad at me, and rightly so, because it's confusing to use lots of different terms for the same thing. So the thing verify, I think verify is really good at kind of what I'm calling the middle of the road. It's maybe not the right thing, but like in the middle, I think it's great, right? Like if you've kind of done some CI before, and maybe you've touched GitLab before, and maybe you don't like Jenkins, like I don't, like it's great for like a lot of use cases. But then I think where there's a lot of the work and a lot of what we can do to make it a lot better, and I think a lot of people are celebrating that, because like it is, in my mind, it is the best tool in the market, and like I thought that before I worked here, and so great. But I think we can gain a lot in kind of the beginning side of that spectrum and the end side of that spectrum, being folks that are getting started with CI or getting started with GitLab CI, right? Like that stuff we've talked about a lot here. Like, how can we onboard people easier? How can we like expose better these words, pipeline, job, stage, runner? Like, how can we make that like more clear? And then also on the other side, like the super advanced use cases, right? Like the, Marin who owns delivery for us, and all the maintainers of GitLab, and folks that do have advanced, not just buzzwordy microservices services that they're running. Folks that have massive monorepos, right? Like we've got a lot of users and customers that are like, gaming companies, or building building not just an Android app, but building the Android code base because they're a device manufacturer, right? Like, how do we make that kind of monorepo thing lovable? So I think on those ends of the spectrums is how I think about Verify a lot. Like, how can we make it easier to get on board, right? Like, because I think if you can get off what you're doing, you can find a lot of positives quickly. But then also, how do we solve at the same time? And they're whenever you're designing software, these two things can conflict with each other. So like, it's also good to keep in mind, it's like, how can we help like a really advanced user go even faster and make it even easier? So anyway, that's kind of how
that makes sense. I have one other question for you, which is,
yes.
I hear people talking a lot, and I know we've been doing work on like secrets and masking things and that sort of environment variables. And so does that tend to hang out?
It's a great question that I didn't touch at all. Okay, so I have the thing that brought me to GitLab.com originally is I had a little side Slack app with a buddy of mine, which makes no money because, spoiler alert, people don't pay for Slack, so they don't pay for your app. But it brought me to GitLab.com because I was paying GitHub $10 a month for a repository and making no money. And so once I brought it to GitLab.com for the free repositories, which isn't a thing anymore, that's not a differentiator anymore, but it was at the time, I was like then struggling with deploying it, and I'm not at the right computer where I've got like my Heroku credentials on it, right? And so GitLab provides the ability also to like have like secrets. So I was like, oh wait, I can orchestrate this whole thing with GitLab CI, and I did orchestrate this whole pipeline with GitLab CI as a free user on GitLab.com. Like GitLab didn't even know who I was then. But the one thing I needed to deploy to Heroku, I needed like an API key, right? And so here we can see this is like using DPL, which is a Travis open source tool, to deploy to Heroku, right? It has a provider Heroku. You give it an API key, it bundles it up all the way Heroku wants it and ships it off to Heroku, right? But this you can see is just like an environmental variable, right? And so those are called CI/CD variables. We used to call them secret variables. We don't anymore because, by default, they're passed as an environmental variable to your pipeline. So in a lot of ways, they're not secret in that way, but there are ways that you can protect them. And so here you can see I've got all of these variables, which I won't show on the video, but these are like my actual like variables that I need to like to deploy my app or run tests, right? And then, so these are stored and they're encrypted in GitLab's database, but right now, actually, I have poor hygiene on these, and they would be, because they're not protected, they would be sent to any branch. So any developer, although it's just me and my friend that are developers on this, could, echo this variable out, right? Protected is a flag that says only send this environmental variable when I'm running on a protected branch or tag, right? And so that means like master is typically protected, right? And so I might say only run this when on master. That way, some bad actor or accidental actor that would say echo Heroku production, key into the log, that would have to go through a merge request where I said yes, merge it, right, before it would actually run on master, right? And so that's where protected comes in really well. The thing we're adding soon is called masked, right? That's the thing we've been working on. And so this is going to say, even if you do accidentally, like again, mostly this is mostly protecting against like accidental secret leakage. Like if I accidentally echo it or an error comes back, right, from DPL where it's like, this API key is invalid, and it prints the API key for you, right? Like if we see that, like just mask it as X's or whatever in the log. So that's what masked will do versus protected. And then I can actually be even more specific. So we haven't talked about a concept of environments, but you can have different environments you're deploying to. That's in the operations tab. I only have one here. Well, I theoretically only have one, right? Like production is my thing. And so I can say also only pass this to QA, right? Like, so like, let's say there's a set of keys to deploy to QA and a set of keys to deploy to production. I can say both protect it and only send it to this environment, right? And so then it's like kind of doubly protected. Well, not doubly protected, but it's protected and scoped correctly, would be the right word to use there. That kind of makes sense. And we probably have those in GitLab too. Like, well, see, so, and then that setting is protected for only, I think, maintainers, right? So I'm not a maintainer of GitLab Community Edition here, so I don't even have the ability to see that, right? Like, and so those variables are probably used throughout the GitLab CE one, but as a developer and not a maintainer of GitLab CI, I don't have the right to see those. And then there's also a set of variables that GitLab itself provides to you that are really valuable when you're trying to build some complex things. And so that's a lot of things like, okay, what's the SHA of this commit? Or what was the commit message here? Or what environment am I deploying to? Or what's the ID of the job that's running? Or there's this very powerful thing called the CI job token. So this is a one-time token that we generate that lets you authenticate against things like the GitLab container registry. So that if you want to like push an image into our Docker container registry, you don't have to like put your username and password in there. You just say, hey, use the CI job token. It'll authenticate you to this project's registry, and you can push images, right? And so there's a lot of these.
Wow.
Yeah, but they're just have been, the project name, right? What namespace am I in for this project? Where is the registry for this project? What version of GitLab is running, right? This is really valuable. We use this in some versioning stuff outside, right? Like Secure publishes Docker images in line with GitLab versions. So it can say, pull the Docker image for SAST of version 11.7 because this is GitLab 11.7, right? So there's a lot of really advanced stuff you can do with this, but comma separated list of licensed features available. I didn't even know that was a thing. GitLab user, like what user triggered this job, right? And so that's what we saw, earlier in here. Yeah, like the CI job name, right? So it's like, it says, what script am I running, right? And it takes the CI job name. But then it also has this like nap spec, rspec suite report path. That's a custom variable that we've set. CI project name though is the name of this project, GitLab-CI, right? You can see that node index. That's when you're doing that rspec parallelism, right? We're saying, okay, run the tests for this project of index 7 or whatever index we're in, right? And so that's how you get to kind of the super, like, pretty advanced use cases.
I see. Yeah, and check out your thing to deal with the Git.
Yeah, like I want to check out the SHA before this one, or I want to, to do migration or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Very, it lets you do complex things. Oh yeah, I want to deploy to an environment specific to this thing, right? So I've got the docs review domain. I've got the environment that I'm deploying to, right? So that to deploy review apps for this specific, right? Like another example, good example one would be the website, right? Which you've merged to.
Oh yeah, I think in some coming releases, you and I are going to be working together on some release app stuff.
Yes, there's some release app stuff I want to do. That's the really exciting thing. I was trying to get you to be excited about. Right?
Yeah, no, it looks really interesting. I think it's going to be. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just like, John said to me, like, we've got Sarah, she wants to dive in. I was like, well, I've got one.
Yeah, I've got this month to get up to speed, and then next month we'll see what.
Well, he was like, well, I should probably do it in 11.10. I'm like, let's like have a release to like understand the code base. Like,
I think that was a good choice. I think 1111 will be a very good target, but I'm still like, where is this file?
exactly. Like, I mean, I've checked out the code base before, and I have lots of fun. So I have a lot of respect for our engineering teams.
That's why you want to be consistent, because then it's
Yeah.
like, at least once you figured out one tiny microcosm of it, then you can start being like, well,
Right.
based on what I know, I can apply this to other microcosms.
Yeah.
When they're not consistent,
Yeah,
then
exactly.
you're just like, oh, it's 3:03.
Oh shoot, yeah, I've got another meeting. I don't know if you do.
I don't, but I think you do, because I remembered you were really.
I do. Let me just run this real quick. It's with Kenny, my boss, so it'll be okay. And we'll see this recording eventually. You hear me say that. Just so yeah, so the review apps, like here on GitLab.com, when we make a change to the website, we deploy a review app that you can click on, right? As you can see here, it does like the slug for this reference .about-source.gitlab.com, like deploy to that, basically, right? And then that, I don't know if you've ever seen one on a merge request, but like if I see like sort vacancies by outputting to charting library, is some change that Josh is making because this chart's messy. And then if I click view app, it takes me to the changed app. Well, it didn't work well, of course, in the demo because I'm demoing. But the theory is it takes you to the
Yeah, that makes sense.
so you can see it. And then the thing you and I are going to work on together is visual usability testing of that thing.
Right, so people can add notes and stuff.
Exactly. So, all right, I am going to run now and talk to Kenny, but thank you very much for this. I'd love to post it to GitLab Unfiltered, so you'll get the recording, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or it may go, if you did it to the cloud, I think it'll eventually get to Drive, but I'll Slack you about it.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Tell Kenny I said sorry for keeping you.
I will. Talk to you later.